You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor here again, and I'm with my friend, Reverend Brian Tubbs. Of course, we haven't seen each other in like 25 years. You weren't a reverend then?
I was not. I've gotten to be a pastor just in the last 10 years. So.
That's neat. That's neat. We used to work in a political thing many moons ago, and of course we've had all sorts of guests here. We had a guy who had been a bank robber at one point, a professional poker player, and people said that... I don't know what that had to do with fundraising, but what we're talking about today does have a lot to do about fundraising.
I don't know if I can compete with those resumes, though. But
we're going to talk a lot about the writings of Paul, who's one of the great letter writers of all time. You know, a brilliant man.
Indeed.
I went to the University of Texas, and I took 2 classes on Paul. One was at that time I took it at the Baptist Student Union. Mm-hmm. And they've since ruled that as unconstitutional. But so I guess they didn't want to have atheist professors teaching the Bible. I don't know, but it was a serious class. I also had a Roman history class, and a lot of people don't realize it, but Paul, in addition to being Jewish, was a Roman citizen.
That's right,
and that gave him a lot of liberties to preach. Mm-hmm. Of course, he's a great story. Everybody, for those that aren't as religious. He's a persecutor of the early Christians. He's on the road to Damascus, and then is hit with a bolt of lightning or something.
A bright light. Yeah.
A bright light, and changes his views and becomes actually the leader of the Christian community. So it's as written. What around half the New Testament, or what would you say? Something.
Well, Luke actually, in terms of. Quantity, Luke wrote a huge portion of the New Testament. Acts and the Gospel of Luke are about half the New Testament, just in terms of number count, word count. But Paul is the most prolific letter writer of the New Testament by far.
Yeah, he really was the thing. Now, before we start, one of the things, if somebody were to give me advice on church fundraising, one of the things I would recommend is a pledge program. I'll give you 2 reasons. I was reading this author who came down with cancer and no longer was a believer, which is just tragic. When he needs faith the most, he didn't. But because he made a pledge, he sent it the final $500 he owed because he didn't feel good. And my dad passed away about a month ago. And that was something I wanted to do, make sure that he had fulfilled his pledge. Mm-hmm. So wrote a check, I didn't want him to be done in the next life, I don't know if that happens theologically, but he didn't want it, I didn't want it to be said that he so that's why I like pledges. Now you're telling me you weren't pledging, but you were thinking about it because you have a building program, correct?
That's correct. Just real quick synopsis. In the Baptist world, that there's some discomfort with a lot of churches when it comes to pledges. There's a belief in a lot of Baptist churches, and I'm sure it's the case with a lot of evangelical churches in general, but where what I give is between me and God, and so
I see.
And so
you don't have the Nicene Creed either.
Well, yeah, I mean, we generally subscribe to it, but we don't recite it.
Baptists
are very non-creedal kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I understand. So that kind of carries over into other things too.
Baptists theologically have been very much committed to the idea of soul competency, and it's my relationship to God, and no ecclesiastical authority has the right to insert themselves into that.
Kind of more individualistic.
Exactly. Yeah.
So. And that kind of America is more like that than say other countries. So it kind of has an impact.
And that's when the Baptists really became very popular in America, and it's
the largest Protestant
Southern Baptist
denomination.
Convention is the largest Protestant denomination. Baptist, very individualistic, very congregational. The church I pastor, we're part of the SBC, but we are autonomous, so we're locally governed, and that's the case with pretty much all Baptist churches. Very, very local, very autonomous, very individualistic.
You do give some percent to the church? Yeah.
We have a voluntary cooperative program where we, again, we're part of the Southern Baptist Convention, so a part of our tithe dollars given in our church goes to foreign missions through the cooperative program.
Well, some other things that I think I've seen churches not do is they often just go with the same people. They don't engage their donors.
Yeah.
For example, the church where I was giving a pledge, it was a Methodist church, I was giving a pledge. They asked, well, do you have any services that might be of use to the church? So I said, well, I'm a fundraiser. Now that actually is a valuable, it's not just direct mail. I've done other kinds of fundraising. I was willing to help, but I didn't want to help them if they weren't interested, because a lot of churches are uncomfortable with money and they just kind of want to stick with what they've done before. So they never called me. They called me I would help with the youth. I'd give rides and stuff. So that's fine. But that was. But they did do a pledge. They were also transparent. I saw exactly how much money was raised, how much money went to the bishop, how much money went overseas. Yep. They also gave you an opportunity, and people like this, of directing their funds. People like that. I mean, you obviously want to make the basic. You have to pay for the lighting and your salary and But beyond that, people want a choice. And sometimes the UMCOR, I think, was the Methodist. When there would be like a disaster, you could say, "Oh, I want to give $50 to the tornado victims in Missouri or whatever."
Indeed. I mean, there's a lot of theology and all of that. On the transparency side, most Baptist churches, I would say most traditional Baptist churches, very transparent. So it's part of the. You might say that Baptists were kind of founded under the distrust of excessive ecclesiastical abuse and authority, and so it was. So we very much believe in transparency.
Well, I think that's an advantage of a small, local church is you have that. You could have that trust. Now, as you know, even though your church, I have no doubt that that you're not going to Tahiti with the money. But a lot of the evangelical movement's been tainted by various scandals.
Absolutely.
One other thing I liked about the Methodist Church was that although he was uncomfortable bringing up money, it's like a taboo subject, he would quote John Wesley.
Yeah. And
he would use and he would talk about the dangers of those who kind of condemn anybody with money, when money can do so much good for the world.
It can.
But also this idea that that money is a sign that you're more virtuous, or the idea that you should give money so you get tenfold return, kind of like that guy Mike Murdoch. I don't know if you've seen him on TV. Yeah. Prosperity theology, I think they call it. Yeah. And they're both kind of misguided in their own ways.
Yeah, I think you've got a lot of those extremes in the Christian world, unfortunately, but neither poverty nor wealth are virtuous in and of themselves.
Right.
It's a matter of what's the race that you've been called to run.
I like that.
What is your calling? For some people, God has called them to a life of sacrifice, where they maybe are missionaries on the foreign field, or even here in the United States, where they're called to be teachers or pastors, or to work in the nonprofit world, or work in the charity world, or whatever, and God has not called them to a life of wealth, but in other cases, there are many men and women who have become very financially successful, but in that case, to whom much is given, much is required, so I mean, it really works. Money's a tool, and it works in the same way of talent. God hasn't called everyone to be a talented speaker or a talented singer, just as he hasn't called everyone to be a talented fundraiser or a talented, business.
I'm a better fundraiser than podcaster. He hasn't called me. But I'm working on it. Working on it. People tell me you're not as bad as you used to be.
Well, improvement's always a good thing, right?
That is, as long as you're going in the right direction. Well, anyway, I know you have a building project. There's a couple. Mm-hmm. I like the advantage of a small church is you can establish relationships. And that makes fundraising easier. Right. You have a couple challenges. Some of the things that are successful to some churches, your tradition doesn't feel comfortable with. Like like take the Catholic Church. I had a grandfather has a Knights of Columbus Hall named after him, and you have the bingo. The bingo is popular. Yep. And my father was telling me at one time they put in the program how much everybody had donated in that year, and he was number 2 that year.
Wow!
You could see the drawbacks of that.
Oh, I can't.
But on the other hand, people would give more. So a lot
peer
of things,
pressure is effective.
A lot of things that work, but you see that in private schools all the time. They have tiered giving, and people want to be in a society. So but where you have to where you have the weaknesses where you might not do a raffle or a bingo, right. Although some charities do a raffle that are Christian.
Some do.
Evangelical. So you can establish a relationship. For instance, even like when you're thanking somebody, you're doing a form letter, you should always write a handwritten note. I mean, I see people not doing these basic things that establish a relationship. You can acknowledge in person. Thank you for your generosity. I saw you stepped up. You can kind of, a lot of people just don't want to acknowledge it. It's sort of like when somebody dies, for instance, some people aren't comfortable bringing it up, but I think it earns goodwill to do that.
Just on the personal side, in general, I find I will often send handwritten cards to members of the church just saying, I prayed for you today, how are you doing, kind of thing. And I find those mean more to people than an email or a letter that I might send them. That personal touch.
Form letter, without that, absolutely.
A personal touch still means a lot. I think especially in this day and age where everyone is so swept up by technology and the social media world, we have access to thousands of people online. Many of us have large social media followings.
Well, that's how we found ourselves.
That's right.
Through Facebook, yeah.
But it's, the personal touch, I think, is as important now as it was in the biblical days, and it means something to people.
Well, very good. I'm glad you're doing that, because that's a big step. Now let's talk about Paul again. And there's two things I'm interested in. The book of Philemon. It's one of the shortest books in the Bible.
Yep.
And you said you gave a sermon on it.
I did.
And I think I would say just the greeting here. Mm-hmm. Paul, a prisoner of Christ Jesus, and Timothy, our brother, to Philemon, our dear friend and fellow worker, to Aphia, our sister, and he goes on and on. This isn't dear sir or madam's my point.
No, it's not.
So Paul always has a very welcoming greeting.
Yes, he does. Paul here is writing to a very dear friend of his, and you can see that in this letter, and it's honestly he's writing really to Philemon, his family, and to the church. It would appear that Philemon hosts at least a church group in his home, and so he's writing to all of them, but in particular focus on Philemon. And this is a very personal letter, and you definitely see Paul's heart, and you get a taste of how Paul handled friendship in this letter.
Now, Philemon, for those that don't know, is probably the first anti-slavery tract, if you could say that in history.
I think you can say that. I mean, you could make an argument that in the Old Testament, some aspects of the Mosaic Law, especially the Ten Commandments and forbidding of stealing and kidnapping and things like that, were pretty strong statements against the dehumanizing nature of slavery. But this is probably the first letter really written where the whole focus is on slavery, and where Paul is appealing to his friend really to receive this slave as a brother, and strongly implied to free his slave, to grant him his freedom.
But the way he does it, he doesn't command him to do it.
That's right.
He flatters him. Flattery is a powerful thing in fundraising and any kind of letter writing. Mm. Sincere flattery.
Yes.
It has to be credible.
If you have insincere flattery, it can backfire really quick, as you know, in your experience. Not that you do that. I want to clarify that. But it is. It can really backfire. But authentic, genuine complimenting of someone else is endearing.
Well, tell me the story in a nutshell. Who is Philemon? Who is the slave?
Sure.
Slave?
Well, Philemon is a dear friend of Paul's in Ephesus, and Paul is writing to him probably from house arrest in Rome. He writes this letter about the same time he writes the letter to the church in Colossae and the letter of Colossians. Philemon is a wealthy man. He owns at least one slave, Onesimus, at least one, maybe more. And he is apparently Onesimus ran away, was a runaway, and it's implied in verse later on in the book that he may have stole something from his owner, his master. And so somehow, some way, there's a lot of disagreement among scholars as to how this happened, but somehow Onesimus runs into Paul in Rome. And Onesimus and Paul form a bond. And Paul decides, however, that he cannot keep Onesimus away from Philemon. It would be breaking of Roman law to do that, but also it would be a betrayal of a friend, to do that, to kind of hide this away. So Paul decides to send Onesimus back to Philemon with a letter appealing for a different change in circumstances.
Now, it's a capital crime, isn't it, right? They could put...
They can. I mean, as in Roman law, you were considered property if you were a slave.
If you were a runaway slave, you could be executed.
And if you run away, you could be executed, yeah.
So this is a big favor.
Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah, it is, indeed.
And he was successful, right?
He was. It says, it does, two things that strike out to me, though, is Paul seems pretty confident that Philemon's going to do the right thing. So he's writing with a level of confidence
because he knows his heart.
He knows Philemon's heart, and he appeals to that heart, and that's powerful when you're appealing to friendship. So you're appealing to that relationship, which, again, as you know, as a professional fundraiser, when you have a relationship with the donor, it's a lot more effective than when you do not.
Paul's also Paul. I mean,
that's right. Paul's Paul,
he's a big deal, and he suffered.
Yeah,
I mean, he's suffering right now.
That's correct. So he's appealing to friendship. He's appealing to Philemon's heart. He's also appealing based on his own personal credibility. I mean, you can't argue against Paul's sacrifice.
Right. Now there is something though, kind of like, he doesn't warn him, but he kind of touches a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're kind of expected to do. He doesn't say it. He's kind of clever. He's very adroit in how he does it.
Yes, he is. He's very adroit. He not only that, but he's like, I'm confident that you're going to do this, but prepare a room for me because I'm going to be coming. And so there's an implication. I'm coming to check up on you. It's,
but he's very adroit in how
very
he does
adroit.
it.
Yes, yeah.
He doesn't. It's a brilliant letter.
It is. If I'm the receiver of this, the recipient of this letter, Paul is definitely. I don't want to say playing the guilt card, but he's definitely appealing to my conscience and my heart in such a way that if I refuse this request, it's going to be a strain on our friendship. It's going to be a great disappointment to Paul.
It'd be difficult to be to keep your views. You know what I mean? Keep a member of the church having kind of rejected this.
Right.
It would create a conflict.
And it's a public letter in a way because he's...
Yeah, you would have to kind of so it's a very powerful letter.
It is.
Well, I was the first, I don't know if you ever listened to the first podcast I did was with Bruce Everly. Okay. And he wrote I don't know if you call these things a monograph, but it's around 12 pages. On Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 8, 9. Notice I pronounced that right.
You did. You can write letters to the White House.
That practically makes me a scholar. Anyway, I wanted to go through this one because this is more when you think of fundraising.
Yes.
Although the Philemon, if you're having a favor to save somebody's life, that's more important than money.
That's true.
So
that's true.
That's probably, I think that's one of the best letters I've ever read as far as...
I agree.
Yeah.
And also, in terms, if I have one last point, even on the fundraising side, most of your high dollar amounts are raised from people that you know personally. And so
absolutely.
This letter is very good for that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad you raised that. I have a relative who was the stewardship committee chairman for a church that was damaged when the Oklahoma City bombing. And they needed to raise $2 million. They had $2 million in insurance, $2 million from the feds were coming in. He had to raise $2 million, which is not easy. But when you have a tragedy like that, the city came together. They built a museum. Actually, it was kind of the beginning of Oklahoma City's come back a lot with the thunder and a lot of the areas around there. Anyway. He was more involved. You probably, as a pastor, you understand people are more involved at certain stages in their life when they're older, when they have kids because they want to bring them up in the faith, and he'd become less involved. And they sent a form letter asking him for gift of $500,000. And, he had not, rather than, if you're going to ask for that kind of money, you need to do it in person and explain what you're mailing,
Absolutely.
or what your money is needed for. You don't ask that in a form letter.
I totally agree.
And, it kind of turned him off. He still made a donation, but it was less than he would have given.
Yeah.
He told me. And so it was like, that's an example of churches not using, not being prudent in their asks. You need to form a relationship. He didn't know the new person that well. They're just asking him based probably on what he gave, back in the early '90s. But that was a different period. You had a project to restore and one of the things that made him unhappy was that they spent beyond the $2 million. They borrowed money, and he knew how difficult it was to raise funds. I mean, he got on the phone and called people. So this $300,000 they borrowed, it becomes $600,000 in time.
That's right.
A lot of people aren't prudent in these things. They think, I don't know. Well, we'll worry about that later. And that's a mistake. But anyway, let's get to Corinthians here.
Sure.
And this is what Bruce says. The second book of Corinthians is the first recorded fundraising letter. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, absolutely. Yes. And a very effective one at that.
Yeah.
In churches, I've referenced a few of the verses in these chapters, 8, 9 are the key chapters, and regularly, in sermons. So pastors and churches are still referencing this letter. So it's stood the test of time.
A big advantage.
Yes, he does.
In that everybody's going to read his letters. For instance, there's not a lot of mail. It's expensive to send. It's on these scrolls. So now it's harder to stand out. So that wasn't an issue. But a lot of thought would go into these letters, obviously.
That's right.
And you want to make it clear what you're saying so there's no confusion.
Paul, just a few things that, and on that, most of we don't know for sure, but it seems strongly implied in most of Paul's letters. His letters were personally delivered by mutual friends in the faith. When you have churches spread out all over the known Greco-Roman world, so if you're Paul and you would write a letter to the church in Corinth, and you knew that I could travel over there, or I was traveling that way, you'd give me the letter, and I would carry that letter to the pastor or elders of the church there, and so it was a big deal to receive a letter from an apostle, hand delivered by one of the apostle's friends or by a mutual friend and everything. And there is still a principle, I think, in you're far more experienced in fundraising than I am, but I think still a good principle even today in fundraising. If you can establish contact, or at least affirm that contact through a mutual connection or a mutual friend, you boost your credibility, through testimonials, that sort of thing is certainly part of it. But having that mutual connection.
Oh, I agree. A lot of people do that nowadays. A lot of charities use friends. When people do a walk, for instance, they get their own friends involved.
That's right. And having, if you're going to read a letter, if I were to mail you a letter, hopefully you'll see my name on it and know I'm a friend and you'll read it. But let's say that, again, we haven't seen each other in 25 years, and I was asking a favor of you. I might want to contact a friend of yours who's a friend of mine and have them personally give you the letter. Then you're more guaranteed to read it. And so Paul used that technique a lot in his letters. So.
Yes. These are some of the subheads that I use. It's raising funds demands trustworthiness. There's no question
absolutely.
about that, and that's why it's important to the scandals hurt that. But it's interesting. Some churches don't show their books like your church does. Some don't.
We do. Again, that's the kind of a Baptist thing, but other Methodist and other evangelical churches do as well. But speaking within the Baptist context, transparency is critical to credibility. And when you have, everyone who's a member of my church knows exactly what I make. They vote on my salary and everything. It's all up on the up and up. We have a report given at all business meetings from the treasurer on how all the money was spent.
That's good. I think that's helpful.
It really.
Although it doesn't seem, of all these scandals, it doesn't seem like it hurts as much as you would think the groups that aren't transparent.
Right. I know.
But people aren't always discerning, you know.
They are not, and that's a big
unfortunate
commentary on society in general.
Oh, well, that's true. I can't argue with that. Here, another subhead: loyal donors need and deserve ownership, and he's not looking at this is what Bruce wrote. Mm-hmm. He's not looking at Corinthian Christians as just a source of funds, but rather as members of a Christian brotherhood. Mm-hmm. I like the word brothers and sisters that he uses often.
Absolutely. Which in a church context is very important. You know, we're not asking. I never go to the folks at Only Baptist and ask for raise money so I can have a private jet or something. You know, it's not. It's
that
Creflo dollar.
Well, he's not as bad as Mike Murdoch.
No,
I've seen him
where
you give your money and you get like a lottery ticket or something. You get paid.
Yeah, it's and then there's been all kinds of scandals. Anyway, but
they have a certain charisma, though. I mean,
they do. They do.
Appeals to certain people.
But there's a mutual sense of ownership in any good church. People know when they're giving to help the work of the Lord through their local church, and if you're a member of that local church, you have a sense of ownership. You know, I tell the folks at OBC, I'm not the church. We are the church. And
seems like another criticism I would have of some of these mega churches that the pastor becomes different. You know what I mean? Somebody overly revered. I don't mean to say that a negative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It becomes too much about them.
Yeah, there are. I do want to make in defense of some of the bigger churches. It is tough when you have a large group of people. Not everyone has the same amount of discernment or the same amount of spiritual maturity or the same amount of biblical knowledge. So when you have a church of 100, it's more easy to be transparent than it is if you have a church of 1,000 or a church of 10,000.
Right.
But that being said, you really need to find a way, in my opinion, of having good accountability within whatever church structure you find yourself in. Right. So if it's a church of 10,000, there needs to be a good checks and balances system in there that church can mutually.
Well, that's the importance of the board. You know,
right. Exactly.
Stuff, yeah. One of the things I really like about the Corinthians is, of course, there's a crisis in Jerusalem,
mm-hmm. Yes.
And if I were to make another criticism of some Christians today, they don't seem to care. They kind of are parochial.
Yes, they are.
And they don't seem to care about suffering of people elsewhere, particularly if it's different, like the Coptic Christians in Egypt, for instance. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly
or
right.
Christians elsewhere in the Middle East or in Asia. They seem to be. A lot of people are more focused on America. I mean, and I just think that's human nature.
It is.
But it's interesting here. Paul is very concerned about the Jerusalem Christians. You should be concerned, and the Corinthians, they come to their aid. So in the Bible, at least at this time, people were very concerned, and there are many that are concerned. I don't mean, obviously there are groups that do, but it is a problem today, you would say. But,
absolutely. Now, in fairness, part of the problem is, and this was a challenge that the Corinthian Christians did not have, is we are inundated with so much news today. I mean, we're inundated with so many problems. You turn on the news,
that's true.
You know, and you see, and so I think there's a lot of people who are just overwhelmed by the enormous need out there,
right?
And so then they okay, well, I can't deal with that, so I'm just going to focus on my own backyard, and so that's part of the challenge.
I can see that. That's reasonable, sure.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of who are just very self-oriented, you know, and they just don't care, and that's truly sad.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but it's interesting here that Paul, that was a very big deal to him.
Yeah, indeed.
Was the suffering of others. We were talking about this earlier. A loving and personal greeting. No, yes. Dear sir or madam. He calls people brothers. He treats them as if they're members of his own family.
Yes,
I mean that's the closest relationship you have. Paul shares news. People do like news. Mm-hmm. News is one of the two. This is what Bruce is saying. One of the two best words in advertising. The other is free. People like free.
One other thing on the greeting, I may not all your listeners may share our Christian faith, but if I may speak on that context here, the idea is that as brothers and sisters in Christ, we are part of a family, and so Paul really I don't want to say plays on that but he does, but in a good way, in an honest way.
Yeah.
It's like he appeal. It's like as a Christian, a fellow Christian in Zimbabwe is my brother or sister in Christ. It doesn't matter that they're of a different nationality or a different location.
Right.
So,
right. Well, that actually takes precedent over nationality.
That's right. It absolutely does.
But there are other communities, cancer survivors.
That's right.
There's a kinship too, though. I mean, there's a lot of charities. People have had. My mom died of diabetes, for instance. There's there are lots of communities out there.
So, from a practical standpoint, even if you're outside of a Christian context, appealing to that sense of community and greeting people in that context is very effective, and Paul does that.
Yes, he does. An honest and straightforward approach. He expresses genuine praise and thankfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Paul is not timid to ask for money.
No, he's not.
And I see a lot of people now, the people that are the good people, not the charlatans.
Yeah.
They go the other extreme, and now they don't want to bring up money. They don't want to seem like they're, asking for a need. They're a little shy almost. You see that?
Totally see that, and I am probably in that group. And part of the challenge that we have is we don't want to be associated with the charlatans. And so anytime, there's been such a bad name given to many churches and to the Christian world now because of these notorious practices and unethical practices and scandals that we don't want to be associated with that. And so we sometimes will run the other direction.
These are not... all of them have it. United Way's been hit. I mean, so this is not like it's just these problems are all around.
That's correct. But I do think, as we were saying earlier, and as you're arguing, that the solution isn't to not talk about money. The solution is transparency and
exactly
building those relationships. Because, I mean, the Bible, money is a reality in any society. Even in a village that may not have paper money, they still have resources. They trade and barter, and so it is. We need to be able to ask for the resources that we need in order to carry out the work of the Lord. In the case of a church, or if you're another organization, you're going to need to be able to do that.
Well, there's another, I don't want to say it's a heresy, but there's an idea that you should give, I would say it's a heresy, maybe you agree or not, that you should give primarily to get back.
Yeah, I agree.
You do give, and you do get a good feeling, you do get back by giving, but that's not why you should give.
Totally, I'm with you on that. There was I won't name this particular church because I have mixed feelings about it, but there was a prominent co-evangelist of a pretty big church in Texas, and she basically said, we don't serve God for him, we serve God for us. We do it for us, And
well, that's got to be awful.
Yeah,
she get grief for that.
She got a lot of heavy criticism for that, and rightly so. But I never. Maybe she did issue a clarification or an apology. I never saw it, but it's a revealing comment. It's a very revealing comment, and that's. So I agree. When you're giving just to get back, then you're not really giving. I mean, when
you're investing.
You're investing.
I mean, they sometimes say that. You're going to get back tenfold or something.
And if I'm trying to get you to invest in the company I'm starting, then it's okay for me to appeal to that because I'm not really asking you to give. I'm asking you to invest, and there's going to hopefully a return on that investment for you. But when it comes to a church or a charity or a nonprofit organization or something like that, and certainly, again, speaking from my perspective as a Christian here, if I'm giving to the Lord, then I need to be willing to make a sacrifice, and the theme of sacrifice is all throughout Scripture. Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross, even in the Old Testament, people were asked to sacrifice livestock and stuff as a show of their remorse for their sins and their commitment to wanting to be a part of the fellowship and the covenant of God. Sacrifice is important, and if we're just giving just to get something back in return, how much of a sacrifice is that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Well, listen, Brian, I enjoyed having you as a guest. I learned a lot. This will be released right after Easter, so I'm going to wish you a happy Easter.
Well, thank you.
This is before Palm Sunday. Of course,
that's right.
A big week coming up. I know it's a big week for you. you. So I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule.
It's great to reconnect with you.
It is good. It is good indeed. And I learned a lot about Philemon and of course 2 Corinthians. And I hope what I've said might help you down the road.
Absolutely. I always learn great wisdom from you.
Oh, great. You can't come on. It's not just anybody gets to go on the Donor Doctor Show.
Absolutely. I am honored.
Thank you so much. Well,
and this is sincere flattery.
Oh, okay. Hey, listen, I have this booklet that Bruce Everly wrote. If you're interested, I'll be happy to send it to you. DonorDoctorShow@gmail.com. Just email me. Thank you much. Till next time, Donor Doctor, signing out. Bye.